So I think there's a lot of value in me sharing what's been going on in our business to really help you guys get the lessons that are required to really deploy them in your business. So today, and again, I think this conversation is really a culmination of, I'm going to go back as far as say 2.5 years has really brought the culmination of the conversation I'm about to have with you together. Because I've grown a number of businesses over the last, it's almost 20 years now I've been doing this. It's kind of scary when I think about, when I actually, got into business for the first time. But what I realized since then is I've kind of been really scale shy. And I've, always thought to myself, I don't really want to grow a big business. I'm happy with a small boutique business. I'm happy with what I do. I'm happy with keeping it small. And then I started to realize, especially after Noah was born, that I've had some real beliefs that were probably sitting in an unconscious space around what's involved when it comes to grow. But I think what I really discovered was there was actually a fear. The question that I really wanted to lead with today was what is more risky for your business right now? And I really want to challenge the paradigm and challenge the way that you think about where your business is right now and the potential that it has, and perhaps maybe some of the psychological constraints that you've put on whether you should be or shouldn't be growing your business past where it is right now, and whether or not it's ready for the growth now versus when you perhaps might think it will be, because that could just be a bit of a diversion strategy. So the question I want to ask you guys, what do you think is more risky? Staying where you are or scaling? What do you think is more risky? Staying, and I'll add more context to this. What do you think has the highest level of risk? Staying small or actually scaling to become like a medium-sized company? And why? I have really tuned my philosophy, my psychology, or what Gary would call my religion around business, is to really be driven by a psychology of reinvestment. Like just having this constant, almost, and I'm going to kind of go on a bit of a fringe here, almost like maintaining a level of a poverty mentality, let me explain, around taking money out of the business and just keeping money in the business in order to reinvest in the talent that's required. I've got one client that I've been working with now for a number of years. She's started off as a consulting client. She's in the UK. She's got this fashion label that she started. First year she did, it's only almost 2 years old. First year she did, pounds. And this year she's on track to do, as of to date of this year, and this is an incredible opportunity for this woman to scale. But what she's doing right now, she's saying, Kerwin, she's not spending the money, which is great. She's doing a little bit of spend here and there, but she's keeping the money in the business. But her psychology is, Kerwin, I'm keeping the money in the business as a buffer in case something goes wrong. So I think the way the behaviors show up that prevent us from scaling either show up in the way that I need to save the money, so I've got it there in case something goes wrong, or it shows up where people don't have the money to scale because they're spending what they make. And I think ultimately, when you stay small, if you're a 3-man band and you lose 1 or 2 people, if you're a 2-man band and you lose 1 person, that's 50% of your workforce, like walking out the door. If you stay small, if you're a 1-man, 2-man band and 1 person gets sick or 2 people get sick or 1 person gets injured, your key person risk, your key person dependency, your key person risk there is off the charts. I am now at the point where I'm beyond convinced that the most dangerous place for any business to stay is small. But knowing when to scale and how to scale is critical. So staying small, I'm sure we'd all agree. But what do you think it is that stops people from scaling? Because you guys you guys clearly understand the risk of staying small. But what I'm curious to know from you is, what is your fear around scaling? Because I know right now, as a matter of fact, that many of you could be scaling faster than what you are, but you're not. So what I'm curious to know is not your excuse as to why you aren't scaling, but what is it that you believe right now? Like, what is your story around not scaling just yet or not scaling right now? Let's just put it out there and see what it says. Okay, so the fear of losing everything we've worked hard for. I don't know exactly how to. I'm working it out as I go right now. Higher you go, further you fall. Interesting. I won't have the time to enjoy life. Interesting belief. So the belief is there that if I scale, I'll have less time, versus the thinking that perhaps when I scale, I'll actually have maybe more time. Because if I scale and I do it intelligently, I'll be bringing on people to do the things that I'm currently doing right now that'll enable me to focus on perhaps the things that I'm better at and focus more time and space on being creative. Maybe there's more time in scale. Anxiety, the fear of unknown. lack of knowing, lack of awareness, how to scale, lack of support during growth. Well, I'd challenge that one. You've got a fucking shit ton of support around you, Steve. Finding the right people, losing control of outcomes, investing in talent and not getting the return on the investment. Okay, we don't want to scale our current model as it's not a profitable model. Question I'd ask you, would your model be more profitable at scale? Something to think about. Because what I want you guys to do now is I want you to get these fears out, but I want you to start questioning these fears. Because what you're telling me right now is a belief system. And it's not until we start to fundamentally challenge the belief system, either through our own, mental gymnastics or through, external people coming and going, oh, why do you do it that way? Or I do it that way because of this. And they go, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And you start going, well, maybe there's a different way of looking at it. Well, here's the thing. Here's what we've uncovered right now, Deb saying finding the right people, is we've uncovered all of your beliefs around why you haven't scaled. But fundamentally, they're driven by fears. And the fears that you guys have all put out there have been great, now that you're aware of it. But honestly, I believe one of the biggest fears that prevent people from scaling, and here's the thing, I really want you guys to challenge what you've just said. Why? Because the reality is for many of you, you're going to stick to this story and you're going to use it, and you'll probably even go to town and go to battle in order to protect this story. What I want you to do now is I want you to actually start to question that belief. I want you to start to question that fear. And I want to fundamentally start looking at perhaps some other social aspects that are maybe more dominant, but we're using those beliefs and those fears as perhaps an excuse as to why we're not scaling. The fears that we've talked about, I think some of the biggest fears that I've seen, like when I've been working with you guys either individually or in groups or with the rest of the K2 community, one of the biggest challenges I see when it comes to people scaling is probably twofold. Number one, having the cash to do it, which really comes down to knowing, first of all, where that money is going and how you are spending that money. And are you trying to actually, are you getting ahead of your investment schedule? And what I mean by getting ahead of your investment schedule is, some of us seem to be of the belief that just because we're of a certain age or we've been working a certain period of time, that we actually deserve certain luxuries in life. And so therefore we're willing to forego the money that we could use for scale in order to invest in certain luxuries, like whether it be cars or clothes or holidays, or rental, where we live, where we rent, where we buy. And what I'm here to say is, for those of you that really want to start doubling down and playing a serious game, at some point you've got to make a decision. Like, what's more important? And again, hear me out with what I'm about to say, is your immediate short-term security more important? Meaning, having the things that you want to be able to buy, is that more important? Because if you maintain the lifestyles that most people maintain right now, that basically creates an unsustainable model where, if you build, and I've said this before, if you build $150,000, $200,000 business and you start ripping all the money out of that so that you can live and pay mortgages and, and pay car repayments and, adjust and cater to your lifestyle, then 10 years from now, you're going to be doing exactly the same fucking thing. Not only that, you're going to go through the stress of having all the responsibility and onus and risk completely on you. So I think that there's got to be a level of commitment from an investment perspective required that if you do want to grow a behemoth of a business, like if you're a serious player, and by a serious player, I mean you want to do something, considerable, whether it be on a small, medium or large scale, but you're committed to growing a business that will create some level of freedom for you or your family, then there has to be a double down strategy. There has to be a strategy whereby you forego, these luxuries in order to be willing to invest in the things that are going to enable us to scale. And here's where it gets really interesting. What do you think is the key thing that is required in order to scale? Planning. So what's required in order to scale? Planning. I'm just going to say that's a given. Faith in self, scaling to planning. The plan is important. Okay, there we go. What happens if we've already foregone those luxuries, Kerwin? Then you're in startup phase. That means you've got to continue to do that. And you've got to continue to do that until the momentum is achieved. And as long as we're doing something that we love, then that's okay. If we're doing something that we don't, then we've got a problem. Does that make sense? Camping, not 5-star hotels. Commitment to the plan. Money, clients. Cash and time. Customers. It's interesting. Only one person has actually got this, actually answered what I think is correct. Oh, two people. Deb and Grant Stiles. You nailed it. Like I'm just going to assume planning is a given, right? Like that is our secret sauce. That's the magic part of what we do that enables us to, compete at the level that we all do for the people who seriously plan. But the key thing that's required to scale is talent. And honestly, this is where I'm seeing most people fall down. It's not in necessarily the ability to recruit, it's in the ability to make the decision to actually bring someone on board and take that risk. Most people are waiting for the money to be, and again, I know this, and bear with me here, most people are waiting for more money, a lot more money, as a indicator that they will then be able to scale. What I'm going to suggest to you that the potential is there, depending on where your business is at right now, is there is the potential for you to actually make more money through the process of scaling. So every single one of you has a certain amount of time that you can spend on income producing activities every single week. And anything that you do outside of income producing activities is going to affect the amount of income that you produce. So I am convinced beyond anyone's argument right now that there is probably an abundance. I'm going to say at least for some of you 30, for others 80% of your week is spent on non-income producing activities. Whereby if 100% of your time or 80% of your time versus 20% of your time was actually spent on income producing activities, what do you think would naturally happen as just a natural relationship between focusing on activities that produce income and spending more time doing it? What do you think is going to happen? You're going to make more fucking money. Okay, it's a no fucking brainer. This is the easiest way that I can paint this picture for you. But most of us are actually waiting until we have a big enough buffer before we actually recruit someone to come in to take the time off us that we should be spending on the income producing activity. And so as a result, we constantly end up chasing our tail in this circle of hoping that at some point, we'll get a level of momentum. At some point we'll have a big enough buffer. I'm saying you should be fucking, every single one of you right now, almost, and I can't think of anyone right now off the top of my head, should be looking at finding ways to bring on talent, whether it be an outsourced talent member, a contract talent member, a part-time talent member, or a full-time talent member, to take the things off your plate that are preventing you from focusing on the income-producing activities that are going to enable you to put more cash in the bank so that you can focus on more income-producing activities and more scale. Like it seems to me like it's a pretty foregone, like it's a pretty easy to understand formula, but again, most people just don't get it. And again, and I'm speaking here, and the reason I'm having this conversation with you now is I've actually been spending the last couple of months, I've been reflecting on what is the story that I've been running that has prevented me from really growing? Because what I'm noticing in this business now, as I've noticed in all the other businesses that I've been a part of and worked in, client side and my own, that the bigger they start to get, yes, the more responsibility, the more leadership, but the easier it is to actually make money and the easier it is to deal with challenges because you've actually got greater levels of capacity and greater levels of density of talent, and you've got the ability to have so many people working on the issues that once upon a time would have only been one or two people working on. So Nick's got a good question here. What do you consider income producing? Just the client work or the marketing, etc.? Whatever work that actually produces revenue. So because you might be looking at the delivery side, and that's one side in order to get paid, but I'm going to suggest that it's probably perhaps the other side, which is the sales side and the delivery, but both of those are income producing activity. But the question is, if you're spending all your time delivering and none of your time producing, is that income producing activity? Yes, it's actually enabling you to produce certain levels of income, but it actually becomes a constraint then. So for me, those have to be, it's like anyone who's especially in a one-man band. Now those delivering and actual, what's the word that I'm looking for? Selling, acquiring, they're both important activities. But let me ask the question: if you were spending less time delivering and more time acquiring, would that enable you to be making more money and scale faster? Stephen Bettles is having an epiphany moment. Oh, I heard angels and harps. I wondered who that was. So guys, this conversation, if it isn't on some, put it this way: if right now you're arguing with me, or if right now you're either debating me, then I've actually hit something that is worth, because there's two positions you're going to, possibly three positions right now. The first position you're going to take as a result of this conversation is, Kerwin, I've already thought about it. Yeah, my industry, my model, my business, where we're at right now, look, it's perfect. There's nothing I can do. And if that's your perspective, then you're fucked before you begin. You've got to be questioning everything you believe right now if you want to find a different way to get to the next level. And so that's your first position. The second position is, oh, look, yeah, maybe, but now's maybe not the right time. And when is now the right time? And the third position is, yeah, this actually makes a shit ton of sense. But regardless of whatever dialogue's going on in your head right now, I want you to be aware of what story's coming up for you, the dialogue, and whether or not your reaction is some form of a, deflection, distortion, justification, blame. around why you are where you are and why you can't scale. And I want to bring it back to the whole concept that scaling is a story. And your ability to either scale or not scale is going to be determined by the psychological suggestions and the psychology that you've got around scaling right now. And this conversation is really to challenge your perspective around scale and make you realize that if you don't scale, you're actually in greater danger than if you do scale. And I know that's a blanket statement that could be taken out of context, but I'm saying for the most part, as long as we're understanding the requirements of reinvestment that I've already talked about, that statement is completely bang on. And I honestly believe that one of the biggest fears that drives all of these stories is a social one. I think that most people don't scale because fundamentally when you dig down and you get past all the bullshit around the money and the time and everything else, because all of those can be addressed, all those objections can be addressed. But I actually think the biggest objection that most people have at an unconscious level is a social one, and it relates to the greatest fear on the planet in the history of time that we know of. Two greatest fears in the history of the world, what are they? Okay, two greatest fears in the world. Rejection, silence, death, not being good enough. Okay, let's just go a little bit old school. It's fear of public speaking and death. Fear of public speaking and death. I'm pretty sure if we Googled it right now, top two fears. Let's just see what they are. Well, actually, no. Top 100 phobias. Arachnophobia, fear of snakes, fear of heights, fear of crowded, fear of dogs. Okay, fuck that. Most of us know, I know there's some fucking stat somewhere, that the top two fears are public speaking and death. And both of those are intrinsically related. So let's actually look at those global fears, because I don't know anyone that doesn't on some level have an inherent or naturally self-conscious relationship with public speaking to a level where there is a discomfort produced on the spectrum that is either creates a mild level of anxiety or a severe level of anxiety based on the level of fear that is produced from the meaning that's creating in those situations. But here's the thing. Now, again, I want you to think that when you start to scale, what do you think there is going to be a requirement for? What's required from you to scale is actually communicating in groups of small to medium-sized people. Leadership, by nature and by virtue of what is required to be a great leader, requires you to stand up in a public format, in a social format, and communicate to one or more people. That's called public speaking. So I actually am convinced now, after assessing my own behaviours and looking at the behaviours globally of others individually around within here and outside, and going, what is that fear that prevents people from scaling? And I actually believe there is a fear around leadership, which relates to the unconscious acknowledgement that if I actually have to lead a team, I'm going to have to actually stand up in front of these motherfuckers and say shit. Now that in itself is a big challenge. That in itself is a massive challenge. And I believe fundamentally for some people could be a root cause as to why they're actually not scaling faster. So when people do scale, to compare and to have some contrast in this conversation, what do you think is the reason that most people don't succeed when they scale? I am convinced that the reason that people fail to scale efficiently is because of two things. Number one, the absence of leadership, the absence of strong leadership, because to me, and again, just so we've got definition of terms really abundantly clear, to me, leadership is an individual that stands, that creates an environment whereby they communicate a set of themes around the purpose of the business, around the mission of the business, and they lead an example and communicate clearly around the values of the business. But they do that in a way when it's combined with planning that actually creates an uplift in performance. So I am completely convinced that the reason that when people actually go to scale that they fail is there's an absence of leadership. You can't be, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't. And this moves into the second reason that I believe people fail when it comes to scale is the lack of ownership. Because sometimes when people scale, they might have challenges and they go, well, I've got the wrong talent. And it's like, no, the wrong talent isn't the problem. It was the recruitment process that you used to get that talent. It was the onboarding process that you used to integrate that talent. It's the culture that you've developed that has enabled that talent, either for the good or for the bad. So the second thing second reason I see people don't scale efficiently and effectively is not just because there's an extreme absence of leadership, but there's an also absence of responsibility. Because as a leader, and this is the thing that I think most of you guys would get intellectually, but you know, there's a huge distinction between understanding this intellectually and actually living this as a practice, that everything is your fault. You know, every customer complaint is your fault. Every mistake that everyone makes in your business is your fault. And to have that level of ownership, to have that level of responsibility is highly unusual. But it's also liberating, because then it gets to the point where you don't have to blame anyone anymore. Okay, you can actually start to, you know, look at every situation as nothing more than an indicator and as a signpost of something that needs to be adjusted, tweaked, or developed as a result of that mistake. And I think that's where most people just don't have a level of comfort around accepting that level of responsibility, because when you run a business, particularly when you start to run a business at scale, you don't, and again, this is something really important, you know, as much as you actually are alleviating many problems when you do start to scale, you're actually creating the probability that there will be more problems at scale. But at scale, when you've got more problems, you've actually got more people to help with this, you know, with developing solutions to those problems. So, yeah, I really, really just want to challenge you guys exactly where you're sitting right now. So what I'm curious to know is, what is coming up for you right now? Let's just have a little bit of a time out. What is coming up for you right now? Leadership, Jackie, is definitely what scares me. Rachel Sheldrick, why the fuck haven't I hired someone already? Good fucking question. Good question. Because when you start to scale, yes, you need talent in order to scale, but you need to start looking at your process of recruitment. Like the fucking hell, the lessons that I've had in recruitment just in the last 6 months, the processes that we now have in place, the profiles that we use, the onboarding process that we have. Yeah, and again, the reason I've had to learn how to do this is because of all the shit hires that I've made. I'm responsible for that. I'm the dude that made the call in every single one of those situations. And even if I didn't, it's still my responsibility. So the question of scale isn't just about how do we hire people. The question of scale is, what do we need to learn to do in order to scale efficiently and effectively to reduce our risk and reduce our exposure? Okay, I want to address this. Steve's saying, I want to ensure my leadership mindset is right. I don't quite think I'm at the right stage, but I want to be there. And Stephen, what do you think is the fastest way to get your leadership mindset right? I'm telling you right now, it's not reading fucking more books. It's not going, listening to more audios. It's actually practice. It's actually becoming a practitioner of leadership. So the very thing that you're waiting for to do, the very thing that you're waiting for to scale is the very thing you need to do to scale. Does this make sense? Because we can wait and wait and wait until the timing is perfect, but depending on our perfectionist intentions or inclinations, that could be a long fucking time. What I'm suggesting right now, this is where the challenge is coming in. This is why I really want to fucking challenge you guys in these conversations. I don't want to be soft and fluffy and have conversations and you sit there and go, oh yeah, that was really nice. I want you guys to be fucking challenged to your core right now, and I want to ask the question, why aren't you fucking scaling? What are you doing right now that is preventing your scaling? And is scaling a part of your plan? And are you actually scaling? And is your scaling going to plan? And in order to do that, in some cases, and Stephen, and I'm so glad you said this because this is going to serve everyone, we need to throw ourselves into those situations. And even if it's with a fucking offshore person, which is, it's a different environment, but if it's a part-timer, a contractor, a full-time person, I'm just suggesting, start the process now, because through the process of learning how to recruit, that's going to develop a stronger leadership mindset. By the process of learning how to recruit, that's going to show you how to attract better talent and be able to identify the difference between good staff and talent. And through the process of recruitment, it's going to help you develop a psychology around persuasion and developing your employee value proposition so that you become more attractive, as a leader and as a business to work with. My advice is don't wait, start now. And again, I think this is an important thing to understand about scaling. At first, when we scale, it's not about you can't scale with the whole goal to just make more money, because when you scale initially, it costs money. Okay, you're going to be hiring talent that in some cases may not be producing an immediate return. So there is going to be that certain risk period, but as long as you've done it the right way, where you're hiring talent that frees up time to focus on, especially the early days, more income producing activities, it's going to free you up to do those things, but it's also going to free you up, in your case, Elizabeth, spend more time with the grandkids, spend more time with the family. Need stronger purpose, then create a stronger purpose. Rebecca, I don't get enough time training my staff. Same with Sandra, spend more time. You can't tell me you don't have time. There is 20 minutes somewhere. Everybody has the time. Yeah, Graham's saying, I'm hearing an echo from a client discussion I had yesterday. It's easier to see in others. Always is, mate. Always is. That's why this is why I like to use myself as the example. As someone who's got a relative level of awareness, has a reasonable psychology, but at the same time has allowed his own unconscious stories to keep him in a position. And by the way, serendipity, it's all fucking perfect. It's all right. I don't wish I'd, started to scale this business faster earlier. I don't. But I'm just starting to look at now and go, okay, now I'm doing it. Why wasn't I doing it earlier? And I'm looking at those things. And I had to get to here in order to be able to have this perspective. But it's this perspective that I believe, all of you should be challenged on right now. By virtue of how I define scaling, because let's look at the 5 stages of fast growth. You've got startup, which is governed, the success of startup is governed by sales and your ability to generate cash flow. Okay, but in your startup phase, you're going to be able to only sell to as many, market to as many people before you run out of leads. So then in the growth phase, which is stage 2, you need to get into marketing. And so that is, you take whatever cash you've made in stage 1, you start to deploy that into stage 2 into your marketing. And by virtue of the fact that you already know how to sell, the more leads coming in will allow you to make more sales because you've already honed your sales skills, which means you're now producing more cash flow, higher levels of cash flow, increased cash flow because you've got more leads coming in by virtue of the leads and being more and your ability to sell more cash, which then enables you to invest in stage 3, which is the scale phase. Scale phase is all about recruitment. And this is where most of you guys, I believe, or most people, and again, I don't want to blanket this out, but I just know in my heart that some of you are making money and you're not investing that money back into scale. And you're wondering why you're still doing everything. You're wondering why there's still, this Groundhog Day scenario going in. And I'm not saying that hiring one person once is the answer. I'm saying, fuck me. We're like our fucking 27th event manager for the last 2 months. Okay, that was an exaggeration, but you get my point, right? What's the fucking choice? What are your options? Fucking, you hire someone doesn't work. Oh, boo fucking who? Have a bit of a cry. Or do you just get back up and do it again and reflect on what you've learned? I just don't get the psychology where people go, oh yeah, I tried that. It didn't work. Well, what did you, sometimes it doesn't the first time around. Like that's how fucking things are, and again, for me, this conversation is about challenge. And if you're just deferring or deflecting or diminishing what I'm saying right now, that's your fucking shit. Okay, because I don't care what business that you're in, I don't care where you're at in your business right now, what stage, what scale, what model, all of you right now need to be looking at how to scale the business that you're in to generate more free time, to be focusing on the things that allow you to grow the business faster. It's as simple as that. Whether it be fucking picking up your mail or washing your dog or walking your dog, the way that you spend your time right now is governing and really determining the amount of money and the opportunity that you have to grow your business. Whether that is in income producing activity around marketing, income producing activity around actual selling, or in some cases income producing activity by actually being able to have more capacity for delivery. It's all there, and if you're not challenging yourself, you're not going to fucking grow. It's as simple as that. Becca, you're saying thank you. You're welcome. I don't want to micromanage my team, but sometimes I have to be on them about maintaining productivity and activity. How far do you go in ensuring staff grow into their organisation and take ownership of their role? Well, you go to whatever lengths that are required, but most of the issues that you're having could possibly or probably be averted in the recruitment process. Again, it's understanding the drivers of people and understanding, are they intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated? Every single person in this room, if you haven't read fucking Drive, go and read it 5 times. Because these are the key things that we need to understand around human behaviors and drivers that are going to determine our ability to recognize and identify talent through the recruitment process, so that we can avoid hiring people that have this extrinsic motivator whereby if they're not being patted on the back or championed or offered more incentives, then they don't perform. This is what I've found about intrinsically motivated people. If you put intrinsically motivated people in the right environment, they fucking thrive, and they need, none of our team right now our current team need any form of micromanagement. Reason being is they were all hired based on a skill set and an attitude. They all had a reasonable skill set that was required to do the role and the job that they had, but they all were assessed and they had their values elicited through a questioning process, and they all were assessed based on where their drivers came from, all intrinsically motivated. So when you have someone that's intrinsically motivated and you put them into an environment where there's strong leadership and there are strong values that are being demonstrated constantly by those leaders and the sub-leaders and the other people in those culture, you don't need to be necessarily, prepping your team up all the time. It should become a herd behavior. If one person starts operating at a lower level of productivity, when you've got a good culture is when the herd starts correcting the behavior so that the leader doesn't have to. So this is just about getting the herd into order, the herd into shape, and giving people, the rest of your team, Stephen, the responsibility in managing culture. I enroll every single person in our team. I enroll them through our one-on-ones that I do every month with everyone, through the group coaching that we do with everyone, and through the group meetings that we do with everyone. I enroll everyone into the leadership process by saying, what you see and how you respond to what you see makes a difference to this culture. And if you see things within this culture that don't align with the values, then everyone here has permission for instant feedback. We practice open and honest communication. And I expect that, especially when I'm not here. And, does it happen every time? No. But does it happen? Yes, it happens a lot, and a lot more than what people would think, purely because you give people the permission to be a defender of the culture, to be almost like a sponsor of the culture, because they get to uphold it. We're doing that, but he wants another admin. Do you think it is wise to bring on another when we may not need them full time as yet? Or is this the whole hiring for where you want it to be in 6 months? Well, let me ask you the question. Is it going to be easier to hire them now? And can you afford to hire them now? And let me ask 2 questions. Number one, when's it going to be easier to hire them? Now, when you perhaps have a little bit more time? Or in 6 months from now when you're at so far over capacity that you have no time? That's first question. Number 2, can you afford to bring someone on for a 6-month period whilst you're building up to scale? Because if you can, then do it. Don't question it, get on with it, make it happen, find the right person. Because I made a video there about scaling for where you want to be, not for where you are. And that's what our 20 next hires are about, is, because even just on current capacity, we only need maybe another 4 or 5 people. But in terms of the reason so I don't need 20 people. So why am I hiring an additional 15 people? Because I've basically been, saving like a fucking tight ass for the last 4 years, building up a war chest. I've now planned methodically for 2.5 years for this moment, 3 years for this moment, to now be able to hire 15 people that I fundamentally don't need, that will essentially create the capacity for the company to grow into. So, I actually think it's a very intelligent move. I know some people go, it's a bit risky, or what about the cash flow? Fuck, you've already got the risk. If it doesn't work out, you let them go. If cash flow gets too tight, you let them go. Be a big boy, be a big girl. That's just life. You just got to do the best that you can when you can. But my advice, Jack, if you guys can afford to do it, and that's a good build-up period, then just absolutely. Sometimes a short-term role, contract role, is not a bad way to go for some of you guys, just to have a taste. Leadership isn't about you taking ownership and leading your team, but also about putting leadership in place in your business and nurturing that. Again, great distinction, because the whole goal of leadership is to create more leaders. And that's really what we should be about. Really what we should be doing is, creating an environment whereby our behaviors are being transferred to those around us who want to be, held to higher standards. Should we be banking as much as we can before scale? Shit, yes. You should be. This is my philosophy. Bank as much as you can all the time. Like, you look at Apple. Apple, they were arguably one of the biggest companies in the world recently. Up until recently, their share price has dropped, and they've got billions of dollars in the bank. Jim Collins talks about it in Great by Choice, how the 10x companies that they identified are the ones that basically put every single cent that they possibly can into a war chest, and they keep it there in the event of, whether it be an emergency or for purposes of growth. So my answer is yes, bank as much as you can. Buffer's always good. Lots to think about, lots to plan. Couple of key traits for leadership I want you guys to take away. Look, the ability to communicate in a way that is enrolling consistently. Leadership is not a part-time job. You've got to be constantly communicating with your team. And as an introvert, I do find that challenging. The ability to really listen and understand. Like, I have 10-minute, 15-minute coaching sessions with all of my team every month. Today's coaching day, so I'll be doing that. But one of the things that I find makes me better in those coaching sessions is less talking and more listening. That doesn't mean that they won't get some sort of a mono rant once I sit there and assess and look at their situation to give them some advice. But I find the best way for me to give advice is to really listen to the team, understand where they're at. And my favorite question that I love to ask my team is, how can I support you right now? Is there anything I can do to support you right now? Is there anything that we can do to support you in doing, in creating more? Most of the time, it's not even creating more output. It's just, how can we support you better? What can we do to support you at a higher level? And you'll be amazed at what those questions. Another one is non-judgment. Diversity is obviously something that is praised segmentally in our environment, but I find leadership is you become more empowered as a leader when people are more honest with you. And I find one of the best ways to create an environment where there's high level of honesty is to practice non-judgment. Because when people see others practicing judgment or imposing their opinions on others, on their perspective on others, especially around self and individuals, it doesn't really set up an environment for trust. So you really want to demonstrate what acceptance looks like at a high level. Enroll people into the purpose, into the bigger picture, into the purpose. These really go without saying. And if you look at the root word of culture, the root word of culture is cult. And I am not ashamed in saying that I'm working very hard to create the most powerful cult that I can, but not a cult in a sense of a doomsday cult, but a group of people that are all on the same page, that are all part of a culture that are actually making a real difference. And creating transparency that drives and corrects behavior to remove the need for management. Like for me, this has probably been one of the biggest ones, whereby the transparency around the planning, the transparency around the quarterlies, the weeklies and the dailies, that creates such social pressure that produces drive that for the most part, in most cases it removes the need for management, because people are doing what they have to because they don't want to let their team down. And when they're not, it's very obvious to the rest of the team, and it makes it a lot easier when management is required and knowing when to intervene and when to manage. But guys, the question of the day that I want to leave you with right now is, what would you do if you had no fear and you were going to scale your business tomorrow? What would be the one thing that you would do today? So question of the day, if you had no fear around scaling, if you dealt with your bullshit story around scaling and you were going to scale tomorrow with no fear and you were going to start tomorrow, what's the one thing that you would do for today? So love your work. It's time to scale. Get on with it. Bye-bye.